welcome to another episode of the Kemetic How-To Guide for Egyptian Pagan and Kemetic practitioners. I'm your host, Sharon. Today I'm going to do something a little different and cover a challenging but potentially very rewarding topic, being meditative chanting from an Egyptian/Kemetic perspective. Chanting, it's almost like a step between speaking and singing. But don't let that scare you, because I sing terribly, and, I'm even horrible at karaoke, but I can chant. There's already been, I saw a couple of very interesting videos from Reiki Arts on here, and some folks on Following the Sun had posted the links, and I checked them out, and they're really neat. I'll refer to them again in a minute. But that's also something that I talk about. I included some things in English and Egyptian in Circle of the Sun. But the beauty of video is, instead of just seeing it printed, we can actually hear it and hopefully get some ideas from there. First, to explain a little bit of my background, you'll recall in a previous episode I talked about how I started out after I got out of Christianity, I was a Buddhist for a little while, and I learned chanting through a Japanese Buddhist tradition. The thing with Nichiren Buddhists, they have a particular mantra that, they have another word for it in Japanese, and it's Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. That's just spoken, that's how it is. And it has a meaning that can be expounded upon. But if you were to hear that, like in the beginning of a service, let me see if I can actually do this. And I'm going to ring. There's a particular type of bell that they would use, and this is how they would start. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. So that's how they would start. You can take this and apply it to a Kemetic, or Egyptian pagan practice. There's one chant that I've heard people use, and the Reiki Arts video uses it, and that's Ankuja Senet. Historically, that was used after the name of a king or a deity. May they live, prosper, and be healthy. And so making life, prosperity, and health. Another one that I've heard is Sa Sekhmet Sahu. Unfortunately, I dug and dug to try and find out where exactly the translation of that. Sa being magical protection, Sekhmet being power. If you think Sekhmet, the powerful one. Unfortunately, Sahu, if you Google it, there's an image, and they spell it out in hieroglyphics, and they say it's supposed to be one of the five mystical bodies. I really hate to rain on the parade, but I looked in Gardner's Egyptian Grammar and in Concise Dictionary of Middle Egyptian, and the only word Sa, that I found means either a dignitary or a mummy. So maybe that's what they were thinking of, I don't know. So if you use Sa Sekhmet Sahu and it works for you, that's great, but it may not necessarily mean what they say it does. And I hate to even have to point that out, but in the interest of historical accuracy, I have to point it out. It helps. See, the thing is, when I was chanting with the Buddhist group, one of the things that they tended to do is in a session they would read through Gongyo, which was the reading through the sutra, and then they would spend 15, 20, 30 minutes chanting, and they had nothing to keep time with. And so by the end of it, imagine Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo for 30 minutes. your brain is numb by the time you're done, because at that point it's no longer a meditative exercise. It's a thought-stopping technique, and you will make yourself numb. The temples that preserve the original tradition, they would sit there and beat taiko drums and had all these things so that they could keep time. And of course, if you can get a hold of one or make one, I've chanted Buddhist chants to assist from. I've done Egyptian things to assist from, and it's wonderful. It's a great difference between just nam yo ho renge kyo. You can just keep it that way. You can't go any faster really than you can shake this thing. Another thing that you can do, don't laugh at this, but get a pair of drumsticks. You can get them at Best Buy for like $8. And is it authentic? Well, we have tomb reliefs from the Old Kingdom that show musical groups, and they would include someone who had a pair of sticks, and they would just keep time with the sticks. So you're just continuing an ancient tradition. So let's see if we can do a Egyptian chant. By the way, one other thing. A lot of groups will say, oh, meditation is good for you, meditation has all these health benefits, but there is such a thing as relaxation-induced anxiety. And if you do meditation or some other kind of relaxation exercise and it has the opposite effect, it makes you feel bad or makes you feel, like worse than you did before you started, then that means that it isn't for you. You may not respond to it the same way everyone else does. And that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It just means don't chant, don't meditate, find something else to do. So, since Sekhmet comes up in, like the Sasakem Sahu chant and things like that, let's try a different chant based on the Egyptian language that would reflect one of her titles. Dua Sekhmet Nebet Ankh. That means, Hail Sekhmet, Mistress of Life. Dua Sekhmet Nebet Ankh, Dua Sekhmet Nebet Ankh, Dua Sekhmet Nebet Ankh, Dua Sekhmet Nebet Ankh, Dua Sekhmet Nebet Ankh. If using an instrument to keep time, if that gets in the way too much, you can try just doing it nice and slow. Another thing, these are beads that I made. A lot of Buddhists use prayer beads, and the Nichiren Buddhists that I saw, especially the Asian ladies that had grown up with this, they tended to rub their beads between their palms, and that ended up being something you could tell when somebody was really getting into it when they would rub their beads. But that's another option that you have if you're trying to chant and get a good vibe going. So let's see if we can do this. Dua Sekhmet Nebet Ankh, Dua Sekhmet Nebet Ankh, Dua Sekhmet Nebet Ankh, Dua Sekhmet Nebet Ankh, Dua Sekhmet Nebet Ankh. There you go. And again, if you have an instrument that you want to use to begin or to end a session, that's one way to kind of enhance the sound experience of your service. Another kind of chanting, because you had the short mantra chanting, then there's the longer texts, and that's as I mentioned earlier, the Buddhists would do first the short mantra, then they would read a longer text from a sutra. And I have to say, learning how to do that in the Sino-Japanese, that was tough. There's a real tongue twister. What's interesting is they'll also do it, some groups will do it in English too, but in both cases they have a particular tempo that they keep. I consider that sort of Asian style chanting, as opposed to the more Middle Eastern kind. If you think of an imam calling to prayer, the way they do it, it's almost sung. And they'll carry out a note, and it's very beautiful, but it's a different style of chanting, if you will, than what's done in the Asian groups. But to give you an example, this is something that Nichiren Buddhists will read in the non-English version. There you go. Niji se sanju san mai anjo ni ki go shari hatsu shobu chi e jin jin muryo go chi e man nange nanyu isai shoman hyakushi butsu, and so on. Now that same thing in English. Thereupon the world-honored one emerged quietly from his samadhi and said to Shariputra, the wisdom of the present Buddhas is profound and immeasurable. And they'll do that. They keep going through it. The nice thing is the English version, you can understand what they're saying, but you're still, it's a religious exercise. You're kind of getting into a different plane when you go through and you read that, especially if you go through the whole chapter. In theory, you could do this with Egyptian texts as well. The only drawback is when scholars translate this, a lot of times the way they do it makes it very hard to read. And so you kind of have to tweak it a little bit in order to get something that rolls off the tongue, fairly easily. One of the complaints that I've had, and my husband complained about this when we did a New Year's ritual, and we were reading from the book of Overthrowing Apep, and he said, God, this is so hard to read. I said, well, blame the scholars. So that's why, if you'll notice in my book, I've changed a few things just a little bit, but it's to hopefully it's not foolproof. I'm still working the bugs out on this. Get it to where you can read it. For example, the hymn to Ra Horaketi in English. Hail to you, O transfigured and sharp Atum Horaketi, who rises in the horizon of heaven. All people rejoice unto you. Not quite the same as doing the Lotus Sutra, but you can develop your own kind of style of reading. Now, if you're going to do the Egyptian, Inuj harek akti soperatum horaketi iuekadim aketnet pe iaunekim roen herunibu nofertiran piteriti imatam imkenu amoatekator kaek. And by the way, if you stumble, it's okay. It happens to the best of us. That's what practice is for. And for the longer ones, if you want to try keeping time, you can. It might be a bit distracting. If you happen to be lucky enough to have friends, then you could have some people keeping time, other people reading. And if I can manage to get some volunteers, eventually I'd like to do a video where we do a full set of something like that, so that it might seem more like Iuneki tretium kesri seniawen ubenekatium ake netesite tektari matketi, and so on. If you were to do the same hymn from the second approach, it would sound a little different, because instead of Inuj harek akti soperatum horaketi, you'd have more Inuj harek akti soperatum horaketi. That's almost a little closer to singing, and that would take a lot more practice. Because we don't have ancient Egyptian priests and singers to tell us how they did it, we have to sort of figure out on our own what kind of rhythm we're going to use, and I came up with one way, somebody else may come up with a different way. But that's the beauty of it. Eventually, if enough people get together and try it out, we can sort of develop a new tradition. One other caveat that I have to point out, in all fairness, and in the Circle of the Sun, I've given a pronunciation, but really it's a shot in the dark. With anything dealing with the Egyptian language, because of the way they didn't write the vowels down. The Coptics wrote vowels down, but by this point a lot of things had changed. So in terms of, is this exactly what the ancient Egyptians did? No. The gods would still understand us, but we would have kind of a provincial accent to their ears. That's one way to look at it. And I'm still working out the bugs in a system for pronouncing Egyptian, and how would you write it in English, especially particular sounds. And another thing is I'm trying to find hymns in Egyptian to goddesses, but those are very hard to come by. There's a lot more work in English that's been done on gods than there is on goddesses. And that's just, unfortunately, how it is. Hopefully this will give you some ideas and kind of a jumping off point for chanting and trying that and meditation in your own practice. And, if you develop some things on your own that you'd like to share, put them in a video, or post on the Following the Sun forum, because we'd love to hear about it. In the meantime, for the Kemetic How-To Guide, this is Sharon wishing you Sekhmet.